Hello, everyone. This is Alex Baram-Faria with Ivy Exec. Welcome to our webinar, and thank you so much for attending. Our webinar is called, entitled Troubleshooting Your Job Search, presented by Caroline Siniza-Levine. And before I introduce Caroline, I want to very quickly just go over a few logistical items just to make sure that our webinar runs as smoothly as possible this afternoon. To ensure that we have really good sound quality, we've actually muted all of the attendees, and that's only to really ensure that the quality of the presentation is very good for everyone who is attending. However, at any point, if you do have questions that you would like to ask Caroline during the webinar while she is presenting, she will be pausing at appropriate moments to answer questions that you may have. You will see a chat box on your control panel, somewhere on the bottom, I would say. And through that chat box, feel free to shoot any questions to Caroline directly, and she'll be more than happy to answer as many as she can during the appropriate time. And if you do have any specific technical questions that come up, perhaps you can't hear us clearly or you're having issues with your video, with what you're seeing, feel free to shoot myself a quick message in the chat box as well, and I'll be monitoring that just to make sure that all of the logistics are working. And also, just so that you are aware, we will be sending a follow-up email to all of the attendees that includes a link to the recorded webinar. So you will have access to the full recording, not just the audio, but to the video as well. So just keep that in mind. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Caroline to everyone. We're certainly very excited on behalf of Ivy Exec to have Caroline come to our webinar series and be a presenter for us. The topic is something that is very relevant and salient to our community, and so we're certainly very fortunate to have Caroline on board with us for our webinar series. And just to give everyone a little bit of a background into Caroline, what she's done in the past, Caroline is actually one of the co-partners of SixFigureStart, in which essentially through her experiences in working with Fortune 500 recruiters, she's been able to offer action-oriented advice on what employers really want from candidates. And there, through SixFigureStart, the experiences that Caroline provides to her clients is something that's very unique and relevant to our community. Her expertise includes financial services, consulting, media, pharmaceuticals, technology. She also specializes in coaching recent graduates on creating powerful resumes, interview preparation, networking skills, as well as job search strategies. And it turns out that Caroline is also a professor of professional development at the CEPA School at Columbia University as well. And so that's just a little bit of background into Caroline. And then with that, Caroline, I'm going to hand it over to you to begin the presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alex. So this is Troubleshooting Your Job Search. And I'm just going to cut through, and Alex was very kind to introduce my background, so I don't need to go through that again. What I will point out is that SixFigureStart is entirely made up of Fortune 500, former recruiters. So our entire process is based on what we've seen be effective in the people that we've hired. And I include my picture to make this a little bit more personal so that you can attach a face to the voice. Again, some of my background on there. And one of the things that I don't put in my professional background, but that I always talk through to people, is that I myself am an extreme career changer. So I actually am a trained classical pianist at Juilliard and the Manhattan School of Music, and that was my first career. And then I became a strategy consultant at Oliver Wyman in their capital markets practice before I then became an executive recruiter in retained search, again focusing on management consulting. Before going back to the arts, I took 3 years off of corporate to be an actor. And I acted Nothing You'd See. I got my SAG card in a corporate and training film. But, I lived that artistic life for several years before, again, coming back into recruiting, this time in-house with Time Inc., the media company. And that was right before I then started SixFigureStart. So I've been, in job search and career change mode, really my entire life. And so I bring not only the experience of seeing candidates that I've hired and talking to them about their searches and really following people's careers and seeing what has been effective and what hasn't been effective. But then also, in my case, going from the arts to business to arts to business, going from big company to small company to big company to starting my own company. So just different types of experience that I've had, and I've done that in both up and down markets and in all kinds of personal circumstances. So I really do believe that there is job search technique that people can learn to make themselves more effective at getting their next job, and part of that is being able to pinpoint and troubleshoot, where you're stuck, and that's what we're to this. And like Alex mentioned, I'm going to increase the size. I'm just looking at the chat box. I'm going to try to increase the size without losing my screen.
I think that should be good. There was just a couple questions that came up to see if you can increase the size, but it looks great now.
Okay, great. So there are three sections that I'm going to cover, and like Alex had said, I'm going to be staring at the chat box, in the interim and taking questions. So if you do think of something while I'm talking, I will absolutely be looking over and interspersing, answers to the questions, and then I will leave time at the end, and hopefully we can unmute the lines if that's okay with the recording, and be able to take some questions interactively and maybe do a little bit of coaching. So I'm going to talk about the three areas where a job search can break down. We're going to go through each of those areas, those stages, and talk about what some of the common pitfalls might be. And normally people can really see themselves really in these scenarios. I think it'll be very helpful. And then finally, we're going to wrap up by talking about strategies to track and audit your search going forward so that you can do this type of troubleshooting on your own. So if we look at the three stages where job searches break down, and this is really correlated to just the way the process works. So basically, there is an application stage. So before the interview happens, but the way that you make the prospective employer aware of your existence, this is how I'm characterizing the application stage. It's typically the resume drop. So if you're coming right out of school and then they have these job postings and I call it the resume drop because it's when you go to career services and you drop off your resume. But, when you graduate from school as an experienced job seeker, this could be, posting your resume in response to a job posting that you see. This could be your friend introducing you to a company saying, hey, you should talk to my friend about the job. So it's that entire process before you get to the interview. And then there's another big stage, which is that first round interview. It's that general interview. It might be for a specific job. It might be an exploratory interview. A company that you're targeting calls you to check you out. When I was at Time Inc., I did exploratory interviews all the time. I would see interesting backgrounds, and I would call people in not against any specific job, but if they had a profile that I thought might be useful for some of my more typical jobs, like an ad sales-oriented job, or a consumer marketing job, or something for photo or for online or for edit. So there were buckets of jobs where I knew that I would need to have candidates. So I would be constantly interviewing people so that when an actual specific job came up, so it would be something online for Time Magazine, I would be able to look through all of my online candidates and pick someone who would be, or pick people who would be appropriate for that I could forward to my client, in this case, the online area of Time Magazine. So these first round interviews, these general interviews, that's really an animal in and of itself, and so we cover that entirely differently. And then I would say it's just everything else, right? It's so that you get past that initial interview stage and you are really in the thick of the process. And some people, they can get lost in that part of the process. So really, we're talking about three stages here. It's almost the pre-interview, that first interview, and then the post-interview, the subsequent interviews, everything up to closing the offer. So here's the thing. Where you're stuck doesn't reflect the quality of the candidate that you are. It might just reflect either your technique, meaning that you're just not doing what's appropriate for that stage, or it can reflect your life stage. So I'll give you an example. If you're stuck at the first stage, meaning that you are not getting first-round interviews, so you're getting people to refer you, you're dropping your resume, you're answering postings, you're doing all of that, you are applying, you're putting yourself out there, but you are not getting past that stage. Does that mean you're a bad candidate? Well, no, you could be a perfectly great candidate, but you could be a career changer. And for a career changer, especially in this market, it's very difficult to get your foot in the door. You are not going to be perceived as a candidate that fits most job specifications because by definition you are coming from somewhere else and you're trying to get to somewhere different. So just by nature of that, you're going to have a tougher time pushing through that application stage, and you're going to have to know that and do some workarounds around that. If you are getting a lot of interviews but you never get called back, again, does that mean that you're just not qualified? Well, no. It could be that you're saying something or doing something in the interview that's just killing your chances, and it's because you haven't had good interview practice or haven't had good interview feedback, and it's something that's interview related and not necessarily skill related. So that's something that's very common. And then finally, there are people who get interviews and they get through the process and they're always the bridesmaid, never the bride. And they can't seem to close. And there can be a number, this is the trickiest one. There are a number of reasons why people aren't able to close. But, one that I see a lot where it really has nothing to do with the person's skill set per se is that, this might be a person who is quite experienced, has a lot of skills, can move in a lot of different directions, and therefore get called into a lot of different job situations. And when it comes time to close, they get beaten out perhaps by someone who might be more focused and just have, much more of a niche specialty, or perhaps because this person is negotiating for something that might be slightly different. Maybe they want to do a telecommute, or maybe they've got very complicated compensation structure. There are very many reasons why things can break down towards the end. Again, that really has nothing to do with how qualified you are for that job or for that market per se. So when you are looking at where you are in the process, really be ruthless and realistic with what's happening in your search right now. If you are not getting interviews, you're stuck in stage 1. If you are getting interviews but they're not moving you on, you're in stage 2. And if you're moving on and you feel like things are going well but you still haven't gotten any offers or any good offers, then you're in stage 3, and that's just the reality of it. And you don't have to feel bad about it. You just then have to do something about that. So I'm checking the chat box, and there's no questions there, so I think I can move on and people aren't confused. So let's talk about the application stage and what some of the common pitfalls are. So I'm going to talk through 3 in particular. So irrelevant targeting and positioning. So if you have a resume that screams financial services and you are a career changer and you want to, say, go into media or technology or transportation, anything else but financial services, and again, your resume screams financial services, there's going to be a problem there. Because the person on the other end, the prospective employer, the recruiter, who's ever reading that resume, is not going to be able to see you and is immediately just going to discount everything that you've done. It is not up to the person who is reading your resume to draw that line between where you are and where you want to go. It is up to you to draw that line. So if you have somehow misdirected your targets, and really think that, oh, my background's applicable to all of these sectors, when really it's not. That's your problem. And then if you know in your heart of hearts, yes, what I've done has been in financial services, but I know it's relevant to media, you have to actually position yourself for that, meaning that you have to take the jargon out of your resume. You have to really illustrate by specific examples and by your knowledge of whatever that target industry is, whether it's media or technology or transportation or whatever. You have to demonstrate how what you've done in financial services positions you for those target industries. So it's up to you to frame it and position it. It is not up to the reader to deduce how to do that. So targeting is what you're shooting for, and positioning is how you get there. And if there's something wrong with either of those things, you're not going to get your application through. Even if, and I gave the example of the resume and the cover letter, even if you're applying not by some kind of written correspondence, but let's say that you have a friend who's talking you up to people, but your friend either doesn't know or you haven't coached them in terms of why people should be interested in you, you could be wasting a lot of potential leads. If your friend's pitch on your behalf is, I know this great person, she spent 15 years at Goldman Sachs, don't you want to get to know her for your job at AOL? You know, I mean, there's a disconnect there. So that person has not positioned you appropriately. And again, not their fault. You have to be coaching them, and you have to do that for them. So it is not just about written targeting and positioning. It is about also everything that is said about you and gets said on your behalf. An incomplete marketing campaign. So, you know, that example that I gave at the top where I talked about, you know, it's not just resumes and cover letters, it's also, you know, networking. That's, you know, that's already two types of marketing that you're doing on your behalf. And some people don't even do that, right? Some people, they'll hide behind job boards, you know, working with recruiters, you know, and that's the level of searching that they're doing. They're not actively putting themselves out there to either make calls on their behalf or get people to make calls on their behalf. And so basically, they're really just, in the application stage, they're only applying one way. Again, it might be through recruiters, it might be through job boards, it might be that they're just networking and not using all the tools in front of them. So you have to make sure that you're really going through every single channel, because the reality is that less than 20%, and I've even seen a statistic that says less than 15% of jobs are filled by leads generated through job postings or through recruiters. And what that means is that 80 to 85% of jobs are generated through employee referral or some kind of word of mouth or some kind of, you know, cold call that someone makes into a company. So if you are not accessing both really the job boards, the recruiters, and, you know, networking and contacting people directly, you're not really applying as much as you can. Another example of an incomplete campaign is when you might have a great resume, but you don't bother to match it to your LinkedIn profile. You know, when I put my recruiter hat back on, you know, there were searches for which I used LinkedIn exclusively. To me, if you weren't on there, you didn't exist. So if you aren't on there, or if what is on there is some kind of incomplete, nebulous profile, and I know that some people have issues with privacy. I really don't understand that if you're launching a job search, but you know, that's a whole other topic for discussion. And I think, Alex, you said that there could be a seminar that is going to be covering LinkedIn. But what I wanted to talk about was, oh, and I accidentally moved the slide. We're still on marketing campaign. If you are not online with your marketing, if you are only, you know, again, sending out resumes and cover letters, just doing the traditional marketing, and you haven't branched out, make sure that your online profile is where it should be. Make sure that all of your voicemails are very, very clean. If you're going to put your cell phone on your resume, you better have a very, very professional voicemail on there, because to me that is a mini interview. If your email signature is wasted real estate for a lot of people. Put the hyperlink to your LinkedIn profile on your email signature so people can always see you. And then finally, a big pitfall of this stage, again, is this over-reliance on passive application methods. So that is recruiters and job postings. So if you really, that statistic, less than 20%, some people estimate even 15% or less, are being filled by job postings and recruiters. So if you are focusing on just tapping, you know, opportunities through those sources, you're going to be missing out on a lot. And active means, again, you are talking to people. You are talking to people who are potential leads for you, or you are talking to people who will talk to people who are potential leads for you, or again and again and again. So the very common phrase, strength of weak ties, actually comes from a job search study. So there were two people, and I should know their names because I'm always talking about this story, but I don't, statisticians who looked at where the leads for the people who actually ultimately filled jobs, where did those leads come from? And it didn't come from people's immediate circle. It came actually 3 or more connections out from people. So not someone you knew, not someone that they knew, but someone that the person that you knew, right? So 3 or more connections outward. And so you really have to get active about that networking. And it really makes sense when you think about it that your connections are going to be that far out. Because if your connections that were going to ultimately help you get a job were going to be that close to you, they would have helped you already. It's very easy to tap into your friends. People do it almost naturally. People do it almost abusively. So think more about, not relying so much on your immediate circle. Know that you have to go 3 or more circles out. So I'm going to take a pause, and if anybody wants to ask a question, but I don't see anything on the chat log, so I feel like I can keep going. The second stage is that first round interview stage. So let's say that you take all of that advice, you start really beating the bushes, you update your LinkedIn, you get much more active about your networking, and you're starting to get inquiries. You're starting to get people call you. They want to meet. They want to have an exploratory interview, or maybe they want to have that first round interview for a job. And this is really where you can feel your search getting some traction. And I feel like, when I'm timing a search for people, and obviously it depends on if you're a career changer or not, how active your market is at this point. But in general, I tell people, you really have to get on the market within 2 to 4 weeks and start talking to people and start booking these meetings if you're going to be very aggressive about your search. And this is an aggressive timeline, 2 to 4 weeks. That means that all of your marketing copy is right on. You're prepared to interview. It's a lot of preparation. So, and the reason why I say that is because people can really languish in this first round interview stage. If you don't know what you're doing in an interview, you can very, very easily say something or do something that is a turnoff, and you're not really going to know it, and you can blow a lot of opportunities. So you want to make sure that you've practiced and prepared in advance. What are the big things that people do to blow it at this stage? I would say it's lack of key messaging points. Now, President Obama is not going to go into a press room without the 2, 3, or 4 points that he's going to make. It doesn't matter what the press asks him. It doesn't. He's going to quickly turn the question around and make sure that he gets to whatever it is that was his intended message for calling the press conference. And that's exactly what you have to do. A lot of interviewees, will say, I didn't get a chance to talk about such and such because I didn't get the right question, or I got an interviewer who didn't really ask me about that. They asked me all these other things. And, you control 80% of that interview easily. Everything from what did you do this weekend, all of that small talk, that's not runaway stuff. You can really use that stuff to talk about things that will position you well within the culture of the firm. You need to do your research in order to know how to do that, but you can really use every single question. Tell me about yourself. That's the golden question. This is your chance to get those 3 or 4 key messaging points in right within the first 5 minutes. And yet it's amazing to me that people will use that question, and they'll take that question literally, as if I really want to hear where they grew up and why they decided to do this, and not tied into why should I hire them. I mean, you could just substitute why should I hire you for tell me about yourself. And there are obviously a lot of nuances to that, but again, key messaging points, you've got to have them. That is a big way to blow an interview. Unclear examples, telling without showing. So this is another one of my big pet peeves, and I was a recruiter. So it's someone who says, I'm very analytical. Yeah, awkward pause, right? Because I'm waiting to hear, so what does that mean exactly? Are you a statistician? Did you do, financial modeling? Are you an economist? I mean, I have no idea what that means exactly. Do you do Sudoku real well? I mean, so it's not clear when people just throw out adjectives. It's also not very real to the interviewer. And you've got to remember that the interviewer is likely not the only decision maker. Unless you're interviewing for a mom and pop shop, which pretty much probably nobody on this call is interviewing there. you have to remember that the interviewer is going to tell other people about you. So they have to walk away and they have to say, well, Caroline's very analytical, and then they're going to realize that they absolutely have no idea why that's true or if that's true. So they're just not going to share that. Versus if you happen to say, she worked on this market research project where she was actually pulling all of this competitor data and did this statistical model around what the factors were that led to breakthroughs in that particular, product market or something, whatever. I mean, so you need to have these examples prepared in advance. And that's something that you can absolutely prepare and practice. And you should have a number of these examples so that depending on what the question is that they ask and how they frame the question, you can pull one out of your hat. You have 10 examples, and you're going to use maybe 3 or 4 of them during the interview, and you can mix and match. So it's not staged and it's not over-rehearsed, but at the same time, it is absolutely deliberate. And you are in control of that interview every step of the way. And then finally, I call it non-peak performance, right? I see so many candidates, and it breaks my heart, it truly does, who start the interview 15 minutes into the interview. So, they're nervous, or they can't seem to find, again, key messaging points, or maybe it's they didn't prepare their examples. They can't seem to find their groove, and then they're talking, and then 15 minutes into the interview, yes, now this person's personality is showing through. They're starting to put coherent sentences together. But, it's really too late because by then, I've lost interest. I've had interviewers tell me, when we're debriefing about candidates, I stopped listening at that point. I had an interview just recently because I'm doing some consulting for an organization that's increasing their hiring by some 30%. So I'm advising them on their process, and I'm sitting in on some of these interviews. And there was this one candidate who was just textbook, not at his peak, rambling on, couldn't string it together, and then he said something really, really intelligent. And I caught it, of course, and I wrote it down, and we debriefed afterwards, myself and the clients, and I said, I really liked what he said about XYZ. And he said, oh, yeah, that does sound interesting, but frankly, I stopped listening by that point. So might mean that you are listening to happy music on your way over there. Take the iPod out of your ears before you go into the reception area. If you look at a picture, I had a picture actually of my kids. I got this technique actually from an acting teacher. Before an interview, before an audition, he would say, you need to get yourself really energized. So he recommended, use a picture that puts you instantly in a good mood. So I would carry a picture of my kids, and I found that it put everything in perspective for me. I said, I'm going to try to land this job, or I'm going to try to book this project or get this client for them. It means something to them. And at the end of the day, my life is a lot fuller and richer and really, not dependent on this job or project or client at all anyway. So it was a way of really getting perspective and getting me grounded. So the picture worked for me. The song works for some people. I've also had people write an inspirational quote or a motivational quote on an index card, and they read it on their way in. Again, get yourself pumped up. Don't leave anything to chance. Oh, my goodness. So I'm seeing questions lining up. I'm going to go through the next stage in case that might answer some of these questions, and then we're going to wrap up, and then I'll take the questions. I think we can still do that. So the final interviews. Again, this one is the trickiest one. There are a lot of things that can go on between that first round interview and everything else. One is that you really don't know how long the interview process is. So there are firms that are notorious for having rounds and rounds of interviews. And sometimes they just wear their candidates down. It's just very, very difficult to keep yourself motivated and focused. So just remember that. That's going to be a big hurdle to overcome. So the first one is what I call white space. We call this is an actual term that we would use in recruiting, where it's the space in between when someone drops a resume. We get someone's resume and we want to schedule them for an interview. Well, they can't do it till next week, so there's a week of white space. Then they come in for the interview. I want to set them up with the hiring manager. The hiring manager's on vacation. So there's another week of white space. And then they need to meet this person, so you can see where this is going. There could be weeks of white space. And in this white space, if you're not in front of people, we might forget about you. Or we might meet someone in the interim, and all of a sudden they become our anchor for what the ideal candidate should look like, and you pale in comparison. You have to have a follow-up strategy so that you can really combat that out of sight, out of mind. Again, I talked about how, with the white space, with things pushed out, you don't know how long these interview rounds are going to be, how many rounds there are going to be. So you've got to be in it for the long haul. You've got to be prepared to keep your energy high and to maintain it throughout. It's more of a marathon instead of a sprint. And you've got to plan for that, whether that's really taking good care of yourself and getting enough sleep during your job search, or finding other ways of making sure that you don't have 3 or 4 good weeks in you, and then all of a sudden you get frustrated and desperate. I see that a lot with candidates. And so you need to figure out what's going to keep you motivated for the long haul, if it's getting yourself a job search buddy, which I definitely recommend, or something else that's going to keep you in it for the marathon, not the sprint. But my favorite is the final, aiming for the job and not the offer. There's a difference. There's a difference because you want to get as many offers as possible. Ultimately, you can only accept one job. So the idea, and I see this all the time, I see this with clients that I'm coaching after I tell them about this, is that you don't go into an interview thinking, I wonder if this commute is going to be too long for me, or if I get this job, I'm going to have to transition really quickly out of my other job. And all of a sudden, there's all this doubt on your face. And by the way, the prospective employer can absolutely see that doubt, and they can't see it's because of these hypothetical, excited things you're thinking about because you're thinking you're getting this job. All they see is, she doesn't really want this job. She's really doubting it even before she got here. You definitely want to be focused on, I'm getting this offer, I'm going to get through this interview, I'm going to get to the next interview because I don't know if this is the final interview, and I'm going to keep going until I get that offer. And then in the privacy of my own convictions, in my own home or wherever, with my own coach or my mentor or whatever, I can then decide if I actually want to accept that offer and get the job. So the end of the interview stage is the offer. It is not the job. So I'm telling you all this, and I'm saying, okay, you've got to troubleshoot your search, in order for it to be successful, but that is not the only thing you should be doing during your search. So there are 6 steps to your job search, and you can see how involved just one of those steps are. So troubleshooting your job search is our step 5. We put it as step 5 because, obviously your job search needs to be up and running before you can really see what the problems are. You need to have target companies. You need to have done your research and your marketing and your networking and your interviewing. And then you need back. While you're interviewing, you need to look back. You need to track and audit where you are so that you don't exhaust all of your leads before you figure out, my goodness, I'm blowing all of these interviews. This happened to a client of ours. She wanted to work for a Big 4 audit firm. Well, guess what? There are 4 of them, okay? So she got rejected by 3 of them before she hired us, and her interview for the 4th one was in 2 weeks. This is not the ideal scenario to do interview preparation. Luckily for her, she had a textbook resume and profile. This is why she got as far as she did with the other Big 3, but she was a terrible interviewer. And she recognized that, so I feel like I can talk about her. Of course, I'm not going to mention her name, so it's just totally confidential. But she was an awful interviewer. She was very, very nervous. She was an introvert by personality, so she sounded like she was bored when she was just shy. And her habit, and we all have bad habits when we get deer in the headlights, her bad habit was that she would lie. She'd usually start making stuff up. And because, we were really drilling her with the interview, we could figure out, that doesn't make sense based on what you just told me 10 minutes ago. And she would acknowledge that she would, just lose herself in the examples that she was giving. So clearly this is someone that needs to prepare. And of course, happy ending to the story, she got her Ernst & Young gig, but this was not without a lot of of preparation. And again, that just is not ideal. I mean, you don't want to have to hit the home run with, one strike left before you're out. You really want to see people while you have 4 of the big 4 left, or certainly if you're looking at more companies than that. So just to give you an idea of what else you should be looking at. And let's talk about exactly how you're going to be tracking and auditing your job. So you need a contact management database. You need your Outlook. Do you put it on Outlook? I tell my clients to have an Excel spreadsheet. That's searchable, that's sortable, you can filter it so that when you get a contact and, you don't feel like calling them right now because you feel like you need to prepare, you need to research, you do your research, and then you're like, oh my goodness, who is this person? You can very quickly do a search, Goldman Sachs, and then you find where that person is. So your contact management database, whether it's in Outlook or your phone or whatever, should be combined with that search log, that Excel spreadsheet, where you can talk about when you contacted the person, what the status is of the contact, what you should be doing to follow up. So call them 3 weeks later or send them a resume or whatever it is that you agreed with them that you were going to do, and then all of the subsequent follow-up after that. And at the end of the day, what you're really looking for in these contacts is not just how many contacts you have, but the quality of the contacts. And so this is why it's in bold. Are you getting to people who can hire you or refer you to be hired? Because if you are talking to 1,000 of your fraternity brothers, 1 million of your fraternity brothers, or 2 million of your relatives, and they have nothing to do with the target sector that you want to work in, that's just not going to help you. And ultimately, it might help you become a better networker. It might be good practice in the beginning. And we do tell our clients to practice with people who like you and already know you when you're starting to talk about your networking pitch, out loud when you're practicing that. Absolutely, you practice with Aunt Bertha, but you don't stick with that for the remainder of your search. So just a checklist. The targeting the right positions and positioning yourself appropriately. Are all of your marketing collateral at high quality? Online profile, I'll put another pitch in for that. Are you spending too much time on the passive recruiters and job postings? Do you have your 3 or 4 key message points? Do you have stories with tangible metrics so that the interviewer can walk away and repeat that story with engagement and with the comfort that they're getting it right? Do you have a process to get yourself energized so that you don't leave it up to chance whether or not you're going to be on that day? Do you have a follow-up system so that you know when to follow up, you know how to follow up, and you actually do the follow-up in a compelling and engaging way? Do you have a process that's going to keep you stay motivated, organized, and troubleshoot your search? So do you have that search log? Do you have something that's built that's going to really guide you and say, okay, I can count the number of people, I can look at the quality of these people, and then, again, for that final round interview, are you closing too soon? Are you thinking about, gosh, do I really want this job? When, of course, the answer is, you want this offer. And then I wanted to leave with some, really broad-based questions that you've got to ask yourself. A full-time job, a full-time job search is a 35 to 40-hour-a-week endeavor. This is your full-time job when you're in search mode. And if you have a job, then obviously, you don't have that much time to devote, but you really need a good 10, 15, 20 hours, a part-time job, to get some traction in your search. And really not spending the time, that's going to be a direct correlation to the results. You're not going to be able to book as many meetings. You're not going to be able to talk to as many people. You're not going to be able to follow up as many times. This is a numbers game. It is about quality. Are you getting to the people who can hire you or refer you to be hired? But you have to get to enough of these people, because the reality is that opportunities will fall away through no fault of your own. Budgets get taken away. Someone internal raises their hand for a position. I mean, there's so many reasons outside of yourself that you are not going to get that job. And so you need to have so many more of those leads than you think you need, so that when those things fall away, well, there are other things to take their place. And you need time to build that up. And then do you have a process? That list, do you have that search log to check? Do you really? I mean, are you really going to build this? Or are you going to walk off this call and say, well, that was really interesting, and then not do that? And then finally, do you have a strategy to fix the problems that you find? So if what I'm telling you resonates with you, and I always get that from people who get off this, I've done this webinar before, and then people will write to me and they'll say, yeah, I really saw myself in stage 1 or stage 2 or stage 3. Well, that's great. So what are you going to do about it? And do you have people that can help you, whether it's, a mentor, you tapping into your alma mater's career services. We have a blog that has hundreds and hundreds of articles. There's an article on there that I point out to all my clients. I'm going to point out to you that is the 5 steps to comprehensive project examples. So if you just do a search on my blog that says comprehensive, you'll get that posting. And it gives you 5 questions that you need to answer about project examples that you use so they are complete examples. So I am going to go take questions now, and I just wanted to put up my contact information again so that people will have that. I mentioned the blog. It's the homepage of our website, SixFigureStart.com. There's also a newsletter that you can subscribe to so that postings will come to you, not everything on the blog. The blog's updated obviously much more frequently, but the newsletter has different articles, and then we'll also have advanced notice of classes. When we're taping things for our library, we let our newsletter readers attend the live taping for free. We have some free classes, so that might be something of interest. We're on Twitter, of course. I say have that complete marketing campaign. So our handle is just SixFigureStart. We have a LinkedIn group where people post articles and post leads, and so that might be helpful. We have a library of teleseminars that we've taped, audio downloads you can get immediately called Coaching to Go. Our coaching gym is a small group coaching that meets every week by phone. So it's a much more intimate environment. People can ask questions about just where they are in their search. And then obviously the most customized support is to have a one-on-one coach, and all of the coaches at SixFigureStart are former recruiters. So that is the webinar, and are we going to unmute the line, or should I just take the questions that stroll through?
So I think we could do both, actually, Caroline. Maybe you could start with some of the questions that we have in the chat box, and
okay.
While you're doing that, I'll go ahead and unmute everyone. It'll take a minute or so to do that, but we can get everyone unmuted.
Okay, great. So regarding LinkedIn, what if you are applying to a position that is not necessarily in your current field of experience? So this is why I had said career changers, you cannot rely on, really that written correspondence, that resume, or even that LinkedIn profile. The 30-second answer, you have to sanitize in the sense of you have to take as much jargon out of your profile as possible to make it more relevant to other industries and understandable, just what you do. But the reality is that you're going to have to be networking really heavily because you're going to have to tell your story. I work with a lot of career changers just because I like doing that, and it's my background. And I just tell people, forget about the resume, get it as clean as possible, but you're not going to get called in from your resume. LinkedIn has certain applications that you might be able to use to your advantage, things like reading list, where you can post the books that you're reading, so that if, let's say, you're trying to break into, social media, you're clearly well-read, in that area. That's a way of demonstrating your expertise, even though it might not be anywhere in your resume. You can also join groups on LinkedIn, again, to show at least that you're interested in that area. What if you're currently employed and so want to keep the job search private? Is that a good enough reason to minimize what's on LinkedIn? Being on LinkedIn does not mean that you're looking for a job. You want to be on LinkedIn because it's a way of keeping connected with folks. So the ideal thing is to, to put no indication that you are looking for a job on LinkedIn, by putting, in your summary, for example, looking for XYZ. Obviously you don't want to put that. You want to put something about your current employer and, just what you're focusing on. But absolutely not. I don't think LinkedIn is perceived by anybody as raising your hand. The way some people abuse it is that when I see a flurry of activity on LinkedIn, people buffing up their profile and connecting to everybody under the sun, I start to think, okay, this person is launching a search. So you want to be a little bit more subtle about it if you're really concerned about that, and only connect to people, a few people a day or a few people a week, so it's not, again, 300 contacts all of a sudden. Everybody's hearing about you, because that is, like raising your hand. But it's certainly nothing like posting your resume on, say, a Monster or some other, well-trafficked job board. Is there any marketing tool you can use to strengthen an application done for a job board, job posting? I hate job boards, by the way, so I am just, I'm not going to say that I am, because I actually know people who get jobs from them, but I'm just telling you what the statistics are. The other thing about job boards is they're notoriously out of date in terms of, and not because the job board is out of date, but because employers are responsible for updating their postings, and we just never do. I can just tell you as a recruiter that it really wasn't a priority if I filled a job or if the job changed for me to change the posting. I just as soon put up a new one and then I'd forget about the old one. There's just so much going on from the recruiter and the prospective employer's point of view that job boards are notoriously just out of date. So in terms of, what's going to help you, keywords are going to help you, because the only time I would use job boards and as a recruiter, I was filtering big time for keywords. So they were most useful to me when I was doing very, very technical searches. So when I did a search, yes, this is true, for an FX animator for Disney, I looked for After Effects, and After Effects is infinitely searchable. So, that was very, very clear, and that's what I use job boards the most for. So keywords are going to be your best friend on a job board, and make sure that your resume is easily uploadable and doesn't have any kind of very, very weird fonts. Like I see people using a lot of table formatting. I don't know why you would do that, because when you upload it, it's an absolute mess. That's true not just for job boards, but for company websites as well. Isn't the cover letter the appropriate place to position yourself, not necessarily your resume? You can only torture the resume so much. Love that. That is true. The cover letter absolutely serves a different purpose from the resume. It can do things the resume cannot. For example, explaining a gap and, arguably doing more about positioning. That being said, easily half of the recruiters don't read cover letters. I never did unless I knew that my client somehow did. So sometimes you are only left with the resume. And the reason why the resume does position yourself is because how you choose to describe your experience and the metrics that you share absolutely positions you. It absolutely positions you at a certain level. I can look at a resume very quickly and decide if that person is C-suite track or, SVP or director or middle manager or entry level. So certainly on a level standpoint, there's positioning. From an industry expertise standpoint, there's positioning. Some people will have a very generalist type of career. They might be a management consultant, and they might not specifically put in any kind of detail what types of sectors they served as a consultant. And that kind of stuff is important. So you can absolutely do things in your resume. But I agree, you don't want to be torturing your resume. I am not a fan of spending a lot of time on the resume. Remember, 2 to 4 weeks and you're out on the market. It means that your resume and every other preparation is done within 2 to 4 weeks. You're not going to have a lot of time to torture yourself with that one. Stage 1, what if a company posts on their HR site, no calls, no emails, please? I see this more and more often. Yes, of course they'll do that because they don't want people calling. I'm not suggesting that you call the HR person, and I'm an HR person. I'm telling you that you should get to who are going to be the decision makers and the influencers for your position. So unless you're going for a position in HR, in which case, yeah, you'll be talking to HR people, you don't want to talk to HR people. You want to talk to PR people if you're going for a communications job or salespeople for a sales job. You get the idea. This is where the research comes in. It can be a whole other workshop regarding how you actually find these people. You really need to almost have an org chart of the department that you are looking to work in, to break into, I like to say, because essentially you're going to be trying to talk to people there. So I wouldn't worry about what the job posting says because I don't look at job postings anyway and don't advise you to do that, and your networking is going to be a lot more savvy and insider friendly. Question 6, just going back to the third tier networking? Can you speak to the value of speed networking? So the third tier networking, I'm assuming you meant the 3 connections, 3 degrees of separation out. Speed networking, I think it's a great idea. Speed networking is a great way to meet many people. There are actually 4 stages of networking, by the way. It is not just meeting people and poof, you get a job. People think of it as like 2 stages. It's you research in advance so that you know who you're meeting and also what you're going to say about yourself. So in speed networking, you oftentimes don't know who you're going to be meeting, but you can at least research, what kind of organization is this, who's likely to come there, and what am I going to say about myself. Then it's the approach. That's what speed networking is good for. You can absolutely meet a lot of people. And then there's the follow-up. You need to be talking to these people for longer than the 2 minutes or 30 seconds or however that game is played. And then there's the request. It's far, far into the future. And the request isn't just about, can you get me a job? It's really never about that. It's about, can you give me information? I'm looking at Disney ABC, and I'm looking at this particular department, and do you know anyone who knows about that, who might have worked there before, who can really answer this question for me regarding, how do their sales functions roll up? Do they roll up this way or that way? Come with a hypothesis that you're looking to test out. That's an appropriate request to make, not looking for a job. So speed networking, absolutely, but it fulfills only one portion of the networking equation, which is the approach and meeting people. Question 7, can you share any tips or hints specific for someone searching for a position in a different geographic location? Oh my goodness. So targeting is industry plus function plus geography. Geography is huge in this one. You absolutely, it's very different if you're looking for a consulting firm in Columbus, Ohio versus New York City, New York. So, you're going to be bounded. That gives you, the box in which you're going to wrap your search. So the geography matters in terms of the associations, the speed networking events you're going to attend, obviously relevant to that geography, the companies that you're trying to target. So absolutely, it provides an upper bound, an outer bound to your search. It should, if it's a different geography than where you are now, you should be planning to go to that geography. That's a really great technique for people who are trying to relocate. I always tried to see people who are coming into New York if I halfway like them, because I thought, they're coming from California, I should come see them. So lots of things you can do with geography. And I'm blowing through these questions because there are so many of them. Question 8, do you recommend using any light CRM software for the contact management database? I have people who swear by ACT. I build it myself with Excel because I feel like it's just the easiest thing for me to do, and that I know exactly what fields I want and can track it. Now that I have a business, that's breaking down a little bit, but I think that, and I'm clearly going to migrate to something else. But for a search, I don't recommend it unless you are really into that kind of stuff. I have heard that it can be helpful, but it might just be another thing to do that takes you away from the real work of getting out there and talking to people. As much as I say, tracking and auditing is a step in and of itself, and I do believe that it's true and will make or break your search, I also think that you have to have something to track and audit. Your system has to support you, not the other way around. So you have to just make sure the most important thing for you is that you are getting out there and talking to people and having enough contact that you need a management system of some sort. And the one that you pick has to be good enough. Okay, it doesn't have to be perfect, it has to be good enough. I'm currently an MBA student, a very specific industry. I also have B and C industries that I'd be interested in. How then do I market myself? Well, there are a couple of strategies here. One is that if you have very, very limited time, and you really want to see, am I marketable to this A industry? You go for that industry. You don't look at B and C. You just go for A. You spend all of your time there, and that's what you do. I recommend that strategy, especially if you have a job and you have limited hours. 10, 15 hours, and are you really going to dilute yourself across industries? If you have more time for your search, I would recommend that you actually try your C or your B industries first. Same thing even with your target companies within each industry. You try your C companies in your C industry first, because there are going to be some kinks about the way you're presenting yourself. even for my clients that work with me before they go out onto the market, we always learn things together by them going out on the market. What people are hooking into in terms of how they're positioning themselves, how their resume, what stage they're in as an applicant. It's not as a candidate. I don't necessarily know that from the get-go. I can guess by how prepared they are if they're going to get stuck at the resume stage or second or third, interview, things like that. But, it comes down to, I'm not there when they're out on their search. So what I would say is there are always going to be things you're going to have to tweak and refine. So the danger of starting with your A industry is you might blow through your favorite leads, kind of like the Big Four person. Could you discuss the effectiveness of cold calling? Introductions is wanting to seek advice from the person seem disingenuous. I think that that's true if they are disingenuous. I think what doesn't accompany the advice is the work that comes before the advice. The really targeted, why am I asking you? I had someone from my alma mater contact me when I was a recruiter in retained search for the management consulting industry. So, this person was interested in consulting, really hit the jackpot, right? Because I had been a consultant and now I was recruiting consultants. So I really could add this. I was already teaching at SEPA. So I was teaching the finance and consulting, concentration. Okay, so I had everything I could offer her, and so she had her 10 minutes, and she opens with what are the top 10, consulting firms or something like that, top 5 consulting firms. And that's the kind of stuff that she should have already known. So I find that the reason why a lot of job seekers don't get these informational interviews is because their approach is way too generic. There's no reason why we should be talking to these people. Your letter of inquiry should really be very, very specific around what this person can tell you, what you're trying to find out. And again, there's like a whole technique around that, but I can see, oh my goodness, I have too many questions. I have so many more. I'm going to get to as many as I can, or Alex, do we have to wrap up? Because we're pushing to the hour, and I don't know if this
we could extend for a few more minutes, Caroline. People may drop off, but we can also, maybe as a follow-up, if any questions we can't get to, let's kind of put a hard stop at 7:35. And if there are any specific questions that we don't address, maybe we can address them via email and provide the responses to those emails, to those questions via email.
So there are 2 more, so hopefully I'm just going to blow through these really quick. I had an interview with an investment bank 3 weeks ago. So far haven't heard back. Emailed them 1.5 weeks ago about when they can release the final decision. HR said application had been turned to regional HR. They are still in the review process. What follow-up applications can I take for this company? Okay, so for the next time, when you are in the interview, you have to ask, what is your decision? What is your timetable? What's the best way to follow up? You need to know that before, because you might have had this information before. And when I talked about the white space in between the interviews, it is not about filling in with, can you tell me what's going to happen with me and what you thought of me and when you're going to hire me or decide about me. So I hear some interference on the phone. I don't know if there's a way to mute a specific line. But what you're trying to do in the white space, the follow-up is not about the search. Follow-up should be in front of the decision makers and the influencers, so not the HR people. It should be in front of the people that you had interviewed with, to be sending them an article, to be sending them some interesting thoughts about exactly how you would do that job. Start doing that job and contact them about interesting deals that you're hearing about. I just said deals because I saw investment banking. I have no idea what unit you're talking about, but I'm assuming it's something like corporate finance. So start talking about, things that are relevant to whatever area it is that you're looking at, things that you're hearing about, people that you're talking to, events that you're attending. I had a job seeker, a client who joined an association and would tell different executives about the conferences that she went to, and just, in case that you missed this, there was this really great talk on XYZ. Here were some of the interesting points. If you're interested, would love to send the program, or I can meet you for coffee and fill you in. And she got so many informational interviews. And yes, of course, you broke into her industry, which was healthcare. And then finally, is it okay for the cover letter to be 3 paragraphs that covers my accomplishments? Or is 3 paragraphs too long? Look, you line up 10 recruiters, you ask them the same question, they'll give you different answers, but they will all say that brevity is highly, highly, highly valued. I would be shocked if you couldn't get it to 2 paragraphs, especially because the first, and I'm talking about, this is a traditional 4-paragraph cover letter, right? The first paragraph is the hook and the introduction. The second paragraph is the overview of why you're qualified. The third paragraph is the meatier details and specific examples, and it's typically in bullet or table form. And then the fourth paragraph is your close and how you're going to follow up. So you're talking about doing a 5-paragraph, I'm assuming, so you're extending 2 and 3 to 2, 3, 4. Again, there's no hard and fast rule about that. I hope they're really short paragraphs, and that the reason why you're breaking it is for compartmentalizing reasons or flow reasons, and not because you just don't know how to edit. I mean, really, people can say concise things in a couple of paragraphs. You don't have space. So I made it under the gun. I was like
congratulations, Karen. That's quite impressive, I must say. Well, I think that was very, very valuable information, and on behalf of Ivy Exec, I really want to take the time to thank Caroline for taking the time out of her schedule to share her brilliant insight into a very relevant topic within our network. As a follow-up to our webinar today, we will actually send all of Caroline's contact information, so that in case if there were specific questions that perhaps you did have that we did not have an opportunity to get to, feel free to shoot her an email. We'll also, as a follow-up, provide a link to a full recording of the webinar, so you will have access to both the audio as well as the video from the webinar itself, in case you'd like some of the information that Caroline presented today. And certainly, one thing that Ivy Exec is always interested in is learning from our prior attendees what other relevant topics would be of interest to you. And so feel free to contact us, letting us know if there's any relevant topics that perhaps we should include in upcoming webinars. We're certainly very, very open and excited to bring you topics that are of most relevance to our network. And on behalf of Ivy Exec, Caroline, I want to thank you again for taking out the time. And for those of you attending, also thank you so much for making our webinar series such a successful one. And we look forward to seeing everyone at our next webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.